All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's September 28th, 2022. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, and that just means that we help companies who want to own their infrastructure to build it in record time. Along the journey, your team will get leveled up on how to build modern infrastructure with Terraform and all those design decisions that go along with doing so. So to hire us, just head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format's very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by heading over to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. We'll automatically post a recording of our session today to the YouTube channel. So if you enjoy the content and want to support what we're doing over here, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It helps us out a great deal. So go to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, youtube.com/cloudposse to do that. So I just got a few announcements for today, things that came across my inbox. First one is just a reminder, HashiConf, I believe it's happening next week. I'll be there October 4th through 6th. If you're there, hit me up in Slack. It'd be great to meet up with everyone. It was also brought up in Hacker News and in the office hours that, yeah, Fun is having a bad day today. Specifically affected services looks like AWS Batch, SageMaker, EC2 Builder, and a few other services being affected, degraded. A nice little environment I found, repo, is a collection of Docker Compose files that replicate vulnerable environments. I thought this is pretty rad. So, for example, we look at Airflow, here are a number of CVEs, we go into one of these. Well, this CVE was if this setting had been set, Airflow was susceptible to an authentication bypass attack vector. So if you ran this Docker composition, you can now reproduce that. And what you'd like to be able to see is that your security tools would catch those kinds of things. So I thought that was a cool collection here of vulnerable environments. And this is no small list here. This is quite exhaustive, the number of services, especially the ones that are pretty common, like Log4j or PHP I saw, Redis, etc. Obviously, this is the company behind this is Vulnerability Hub. And I guess the other way of thinking about this is a way to do your integration tests if you're writing pen testing tools or security vulnerability detection tools, scanning tools, etc. All right. Has anyone seen this before or seen ways that they could apply this? Freak out your security teams. All right. Next announcement. GitHub Actions. So we're big proponents of GitHub Actions. I love GitHub Actions, especially as soon as they added composite actions and shared workflows. So this is another nice addition. So you can customize the way that the event shows in the actions log. So for example, here, set the run name. And then when you look at the list, you can see that what actually happened in that run was a deployment, for example, to a certain environment by a certain person. Why that's nice is if you are looking at something like this, you're just going to act, or let me go instead to like an application. You're going to actions here. Here's a run of everything that's been going on here. It would have been nice to see that, oh, this was a deployment to a specific environment by Garuha. Next, oops. The next announcement was Cloudflare open sourcing their workers. Workers are the lambdas supported by Cloudflare. So they've open sourced the platform that they've used to implement that, or at least some version of it, obviously. I guess this is interesting if you want to run a local development environment with workers, perhaps, or if you were looking to host some internal apps, but following the same pattern on some bare metal or something. All options. Yeah, here they mention local development and testing, programmable proxies, channel services. Has anybody been investing significantly in Cloudflare workers? Have an opinion on that compared to Lambdas, and what are some of the noticeable advantages? All right. Next announcement was Amazon has finally added the ability to set IAM permissions around resource records in Route 53 zones. I guess that was not previously possible to do it at that granularity. So that's a nice little addition. Especially if you have large zones with lots of records and you want to restrict it down to specific like services and Kubernetes, they can modify them.
Can you do a wildcard? Anyone's used it, but
yeah, let's take a quick look here if there's an example. Yeah, I don't know to the extent that wildcards are supported, but I mean, wildcards are frequently supported, so I would be surprised if not.
It says a single resource record set, so I assume one record, and then all resource record sets of specific type.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh, actually, you could do contains a specific string. Cool.
Yep, there it is, contain. Yeah. So close to wildcard, not exactly.
Yeah, good enough, or enough for now, and maybe in a year they'll give us a wildcard.
Yeah.
Usually wildcards supported through condition statement in IAM policies. So even though they don't document this condition specifically to every resource, it might be supported. So you should just test it. Like take a generic example with condition statement in IAM and try it for Route 53, and it might just work because that's just a different level logic. They don't necessarily document it.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Max, nice to see you around. It's been a while.
Yeah, I know.
Glad to see you doing well.
Thanks.
The last announcement that I had on my radar was Terraform Enterprise announcement. I thought this was interesting because just last week I shared that Spacelift now has a Prometheus exporter, and it looks like you can now do the same thing for Terraform Cloud. So they show a Grafana example here with metrics, presuming that it's using some exporter-like thing. I didn't see specifically Prometheus exporter mentioned, but oh, in the Prometheus format. Yeah, cool. So I think this is really cool. I wish, like I said last week, I wish every SaaS service did this, regardless of if it's developer focused or whatnot. It's really interesting when the business can start gleaning more metrics about the usage of products, for example. All right, anyone have other cool announcements that stood out for this past week? All right, then let's move into Q&A. I put in one question. This was just from me. We've been doing a lot more ECS projects lately. I think it's an interesting sign because historically, we were doing mostly just Kubernetes for like 5 years. And then lately, in the last couple of years, a lot more projects have come across for ECS work. I think ECS is nice from the one perspective in that you never really need to worry about the platform. It's just always there. You're never having to do all these major platform upgrades like you do with EKS. They haven't really been breaking any version compatibility. So from that standpoint, I really like the contract Amazon has with the user, that it's just there. One of the challenges has been for us doing deployments on ECS. I feel like we do a good job of it, but I heard a pattern just this week that I hadn't thought about. So that just made me think about, maybe time to bring this up again. So let me talk about the pattern we're using for ECS deployments. And I'd like to hear, some of the other patterns out there. So one of the things that we wanted to do when talking about ECS deployments is we wanted to be able to deploy application changes along with infrastructure changes at the same time. So if you're adding environment variables, if you're opening or closing ports, if the sidecars are changing, if, I don't know, any additional target groups needed to be added or paths changed, all that could go out together with the application change. By and large, most implementations I see for ECS will simply just bump the image tag or something. And I've never understood how that works. How do you coordinate that that image goes out with infrastructure changes if they're not going out at the same time? It's something coming from Kubernetes that we take for granted with things like Helm. We're just redeploying the Helm chart, and that Helm chart will be versioned, for us at least, typically alongside the application that we're deploying. So we accomplish this using a combination of tools. Obviously, it's Terraform. And then we're using Spacelift and then GitHub Actions. So we use GitHub Actions for the CI. And we're building image artifacts, pushing those to ECR, as is conventional. And then when we want to do a deployment, we're just using the Spacelift API to trigger a deployment of that stack at that particular commit shop. This works well because now the application code changes go out together with the infrastructure changes as well. So the pattern that I just heard about was interesting, I thought, and that was, well, do what you're doing for the most part, but when you do the deployment of the application, actually make that part a CloudFormation change set. That way, if there's any problems, it just automatically rolls back for you as well. So has anybody done something similar? Is anybody blending CloudFormation in some way with ECS, with Terraform? I'd be curious. Are you giving up on using Terraform for ECS deployments and just doing the image tag pattern? Any other ideas?
We use Terraform for ECS, but we don't use image tags. We have pipelines that set up beforehand that will populate. So we'll create the service and just let it spin while it's trying to grab the tag, but then we'll let the pipeline build and push it out instead of trying to do. I used to try and do it where I would try and download and push up to the ECR repo and all that, but it just got too complicated.
Yeah, so in that case, you're using something like code build, code pipeline, and the native.
Yep,
AWS.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that's not a bad option. What I don't like about it is what you were mentioning, that part about rebuilding the artifact. I've always liked this idea of using the same artifact in dev staging prod and never rebuilding it, just retagging it. But yeah, I can see the merits of maybe going the native route.
That's what we did. We used to have it like built and pushed up to Docker Hub. But it just got really complicated. Like anytime you rolled out, you had to make sure you had the right tags on there, and then it would just like sometimes you would miss it, and it got complicated.
Okay, fair point. Any other ideas?
Alex here.
Eric, I don't know
Alex?
if this. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
So I've been doing Fargate deployments for quite a long time, right from the time they launched the service. And it generally just comes down to, make the service, set it up so the team can produce their Docker images. And I've got, now there are GitHub Actions that will just update the tag within the task configuration. and push a service reload with a new task. But before that, we didn't have that. So I was just iterating that manually with a bunch of scripts in GitHub Actions. But the place where you lose the back and forth between the service configuration, say, for example, you need to change your environment variables
Yeah.
and what the image is expecting when it comes up. Like, you've got to approach that as a backwards or a forwards compatible always scenario. So if you need the service to present environment variables for the new image, you got to do that first, you know?
Okay. Yeah. So just making sure adjacent versions are backwards compatible.
Yeah. So ideally, and I tell everyone, they should always make their containers completely backwards compatible. Just like when you have a database and you've got, you know, the format for your currency, for example, USD. You know, if you're going to change currency, don't just change the schema. Don't change that column. Add to the schema always. Never take away.
Yeah.
Save that for your cleanup phase.
Yeah, so keep it simple, stupid. Basically, update the task definition image tags separately out of phase with the Terraform, and then update the Terraform in a separate phase. I guess if you do that, you need to ignore changes to the task definition. Or what happens if you deploy the Terraform changes after?
Yeah, that's just flag.
Yeah.
Well, if you launch a container that's expecting an environment variable, you know, there's a good chance your health check is going to fail and your service isn't going to complete the blue-green cycle. So, you know, no harm, no foul there. It's blue-green. But, you know, it's a pretty good system for catching those dumb human mistakes.
Okay. There was one other person that stood up their hand, I think, or was talking there just before Alex.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the way I do this on one project is, you know, pipeline to do the, you know, image SHA update on the task def. And when it does that, you know, update, it also pushes the latest image SHA or image tag for what it's rolling out to SSM parameter store.
Okay.
And then Terraform, when you do need to change environment variables or secrets or anything, you know, surrounding that, reads that in and feeds it back through. So it's there's a kind of better system there where the building of the image, you know, and I think it's kind of what you're doing. It sounds like, and you kick it off via Spacelift, where it builds the image, pushes it, and pushes the, you know, latest tag that it's just made into SSM parameter store, and then that gets picked up by Terraform, and you can kind of execute off that. We do both on the project that I have, where there's, you know, some deployments that when it doesn't require any, you know, configuration changes, secret changes, then it all just runs through the pipeline. But if it does require those configuration changes, then they just go out alongside of it.
I really like that. I think the hybrid approach is probably a good way, where depending on paths changed, if none of the Terraform was modified, just skip that step and proceed to the method you're doing, update the SSM parameter, and push. The benefit with that is your deployments are so much faster. You're not calling Terraform to do
exactly.
that. And then when you need to do Terraform, you get that too. So it solves both problems, and the developer doesn't need to know how it's done.
Yep. Yeah, that's the thought. And I mean, I kind of agree with your frustration, though, that there isn't, it still doesn't feel great, but it is what it is with ECS. And I think it's just, we're in a system that it's kind of janky, but I don't know. It also works really well. So can't bash on it too hard.
Yeah, it's just missing the quality of life considerations that you could build into Jenkins, for example. One of the things I'm really missing in cloud-based CI is the ability to preemptively get a list of version tags, for example, that are available in ECR for a particular environment, and then make that a prompt for the user. You know, it was very easy to do the reduction. Like in dev, you've got all the tags, of course. In QA,
Yeah.
you've got fewer. In staging, you've got even fewer because they haven't passed that promotion phase. But that's something that's very hard to accomplish with the modern SaaS we've got.
Yeah, I agree. That would be kind of nice to have. I think it'd be cool. Like, so I'm pretty sure something like that would be totally feasible in Jenkins, custom, of course, but with GitHub Actions, you can do workflow dispatches, which are nice and they take an input, but there's, yeah, no chance at populating that with like valid inputs. You can validate it after it's been submitted, but you can't pre-fill it with a list of valid options dynamically.
One of the things that I'm missing very much in the space, and a lot of the companies and a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years are so focused on unit testing that they don't think about integration testing. And with that, I mean, you've got your front end service that needs to communicate to your back end service. But before you're rolling out your change, have you made sure that all of your front end APIs and all of your back end APIs still work? Now, one of the historic projects that I saw this on was the OpenStack Zool project, which kind of ties into Gerrit and the Jenkins methodology of doing things. But essentially, you describe in your repo all of your dependencies as well. So now when if you think about this in your ECS or your Fargate deployment strategy, have you not just successfully tested this image, but made sure that all of your backend contracts are still being fulfilled by your front end before actually doing deployment as part of your CD pipeline? And I'm specifically phrasing that as a CD pipeline because I think it is outside of CI.
Yeah, I think there are different degrees of this. So I'll be honest that the approach that we generally recommend for integration level testing is at a lower level than that. We recommend sticking with a Docker Compose based strategy for the integration tests. The reason being that then it's the same thing that developers can iterate on locally. The downside is it's not validating that integration at the infrastructure layer and the tools that you've gotten deployed. I think that the challenge there is often customers don't have like the ability to run the synthetic testing to the degree needed. If they did, that same synthetic testing could be pointed at a Docker Compose environment just as easily as it could be pointed to an endpoint running ECS or a ephemeral environment in ECS or something. What I've been interested in adding into our pipelines, but we haven't done it yet, is a smoke test step after deployments that would run through a set of validations just to make sure that things seem sound.
But then would you then automate your smoke test deployments to also get pushed out? Because as your code changes, if you're just pinging a health check endpoint as an example, and you now have 30 other endpoints in your API that you're deploying, if you're just pinging the health check endpoint, but that has never changed, is that sufficient to pass the smoke test, or are you thinking?
No, so I mean full-on synthetic tests. This is where you have something simulating a user going through the most common execution paths that a user would take. If it's an e-commerce site, the synthetic test would, sign in as a user, add a product to cart, go to checkout, use a test card number, and proceed that way.
One of the things that's come up and really built themselves a great product is endtest.io. Considering how difficult it is to convince some people just to write tests, like front-end tests, and how expensive that adds, how much expense that adds to a project potentially.
What was the site?
Endtest, E-N-D test.
Oh.
I probably misspoke. I've been saying env a million times today. It's super easy. In 20 minutes, you can create an account. You can say, go to this website, enter your username, enter your password, click submit. You can qualify database interactions by, if you're doing a user admin panel, like add a user, delete a user, right? You can do it all. It's trivial stuff. Product owners, non-technical product owners can use this tool and be very successful and achieve the qualification of a product in staging or in QA. QA folks love this, they're technical. But then by the time you ship a product to prod, there shouldn't be any question about whether or not the API or the integrations are going to work. Like, this should all be satisfied. This is pass through. It's end-to-end testing. It does not cover your unit tests or anything that you'd want.
Yeah. This would be proper integration test. Then that's cool. I mean, there's so many of these services. I kind of just have faded it out. But it's good to have another one here that comes with a good recommendation.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a fanboy for this company. They're doing everything right.
Cool. And the pricing doesn't seem too crazy. I like that what they're doing is just limiting the parallelism, but not limiting the number of tests. And when you look at Datadog, for example, it gets really pricey with synthetic tests.
Yeah, don't use their synthetic tests. Use something else.
There's another product that I ran into, firelab.io, which does something similar.
There you go.
Definitely cheaper, but this limit, like I could easily imagine that you can blow through these pretty quickly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other one is Catalan, and I like that if you approach a scenario where you need API testing, like really high quality and in-depth API with a K. Yeah, with a K though. Yeah. So anytime, like I don't think you can really beat them as far as API tests go. All right, guys, I got to drop off. Thanks again.
All right, thanks for your input, Alex. All right, so I'm out of questions today. Any other questions here? I'm checking the Zoom here.
I've been thinking about AWS org design and splitting up like jurisdictional regions.
Okay, that's a good one.
So simplistically, got a bunch of accounts. Each one holds a workload. If that workload exists in multiple regions, fine, you don't necessarily need multiple accounts. You can have distinct deployments per region. But if I want to group regions into jurisdictions, I can kind of conceptually do that. I can say that all the US regions, either by convention or by configuration, are under a US jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But am I better off, or what are the pros and cons, for using a different account for a different jurisdiction, just so I have like a harder boundary, it's harder to jump over?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I would do it that way. For a few things, this is like a common design decision that we would go through when designing the org structure for a customer. This is one of our standard design decisions. So we talked about this previously on other office hours, but let me open this up in a, or make this wider here. All right, so you're going through this design decision process. You're going to have different workload accounts. One of the first things is to distinguish kind of between them, and this gives you maybe a little model for how to think about it. So in our model, you'll have like a platform organizational unit, and that would have a set of accounts for production, staging, sandbox, and dev. Now, this would represent like a platform that could exist across any number of regions. It's not geo-fenced in any kind of way. In your situation, if you're gonna, like for GDPR or some reason, need to make sure that some workloads never contaminate, other regions, what I would do is create an organizational unit, because you never know if you're going to want to have more accounts in that jurisdiction. And then in that organizational unit, apply a service control policy to prevent ever launching resources in jurisdictions other than the one permitted by that region. And then provision your workload accounts therein. So your dev, staging, prod, sandbox accounts, for example. Maybe you don't need sandbox. Maybe you only need production and dev, for example. That would be up to you. Separately, you'll have like your core accounts or your management accounts, depending on what makes sense, or your governance accounts. These would be like audit logs, a corp account, maybe for internal IT services, a security account for your security hub and guard duty and so forth. I don't know if those make sense to break up the same way jurisdictionally. For example, security hub, I don't see any reason why it couldn't aggregate findings across all of your accounts in every jurisdiction and region. A network account, that comes down to your networking strategy. If you want to make sure, like we use it for deploying a transit gateway to connect various accounts. In a compliance scenario, you might want to consider having multiple transit gateway hubs and making sure that one hub for US traffic is never peered with the hub for European traffic. So you have a hard separation there and you could never accidentally route traffic across those regions. So far, are we making sense? Are we on the same page or?
Yeah, that will make sense. I guess, yeah, one of the reasons you might have multiple workloads in a jurisdiction would be sort of redundancy, and so that's just a different animal from distinct workloads. But
yeah,
in both
or
cases,
like
deploying across multiple regions. So, yeah.
Yeah, or like a common pattern, like you might be going for multiple benchmarks, right? So you could be going for GDPR and you could be going for PCI DSS. And if you're going for PCI DSS, maybe you want to have a certain set of accounts and the workloads therein, under that governance, but you don't care about, but everything is under GDPR, but then a smaller subset of accounts and workloads are subject to PCI DSS, and then those would be in a separate account, for example. And obviously, this stuff could be architected in different ways, and you can use other controls and IAM and VPCs. So first thing to note is like VPCs, that's just a network layer construct of isolation. It's not actually like a container of resources. And then the other one is that it's so much easier when you just think about things logically as different types of building blocks. And I like that. In fact, a customer this week that we're talking to, they were building out their infrastructure, and their approach to like workload segmentation, I thought was really practical. So the question we were asking them is, do you want to have multiple subnets for different types of workloads, like a subnet for your databases or for Redis, and a separate subnet for Postgres maybe? And their answer to that is no, we'd prefer just to keep our network architecture very clean. So what we just do is if we need different types of workloads segmented by different networks, we'll just deploy another VPC pattern. And that VPC pattern is always one VPC, 3 private subnets, and that's the pattern they rubber stamp every time they need a different type of workload. Instead of having to figure out, well, this VPC is custom and it's going to have this many subnets across this pattern, and creating snowflakes, which is hard to manage. So all of that. Okay, go on.
So, sorry, the one challenge I would have then, if you break it down to like that many accounts, if you're in an org that's doing multiple compliance programs, you also have a lot of overlap. Like there's a lot of data points where, and Fed PCI would overlap with GDPR, where you could now have common controls, which you're actually now missing out on because of the separation that you've done at your account structure. So now in your scoping sessions, you actually have to go and say, okay, well, yes, my PCI environment is only this account, but everything that you need to answer for PCI needs to be answered. There's no common control framework that you can then apply that say, hey, but this actually also answers GDPR, because that environment isn't necessarily GDPR friendly. You might have a different environment that's GDPR friendly and answers the GDPR questions accurately, but that environment won't be PCI friendly. If that makes any sense.
I feel like that would come down to the tools that are being used, whether using Security Hub or Wiz or Vanta. Wouldn't one of those platforms help make those controls more easily aligned? At a glance.
No, because each of those environments have to fulfill all of the controls for that specific certification or that specific compliance. You can't say my internet ingress is GDPR compliant, and therefore this other environment that I'm using for my payment is secure, is now for handling card data, as an example, is also GDPR compliant, because it's a different environment. Each of those accounts would have to go through a full audit.
That's what we always do. So like in our model, at least when we're deploying Security Hub, GuardDuty, config, we're deploying that in every single account. And then we enable the conformance packs that we want to adhere to for the given account.
Yeah, no, I understand that. What I'm saying is that if you look at the compliance frameworks that exist, and you look at like 5 or 6 different compliance programs, and I'm not gonna I'm not gonna name them or try and identify them all, but you could come up with, let's say, 1,000 questions that you could answer, and if you could answer those 1,000 questions, you could answer 90% of the compliance programs that exist.
Yes,
my
true.
challenge is that in your design, you wouldn't be able to build out like a common control framework where you say, this is my one account or my one area, my corporate prod account or my platform prod account, where all of these controls are present, and therefore I can use a common control framework to answer to GDPR, but also answer to PCI, but also answer to FedRAMP out of a singular account. And again, I'm just using those as very, very basic or common examples. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it.
Okay. I guess I'm not entirely following, but I'll take your word on it because you're usually right. So, there you go, Dave. Take that into account too. Dave, more questions on your architecture there for org structure.
No, that's pretty helpful. I mean, that's, I guess, as far as I've got so far. I'll come back next week with more.
Okay, sounds good.
Although I will say, so looking at just talking about kind of control tools, kind of security compliance, something that really surprised me on a few calls about CSPM tools and, kind of getting visibility of compliance. A lot of them seem to say, oh, we do HIPAA compliance or PCI DSS or whatever, but actually they've just mapped those controls onto the CIS benchmark controls, and then they just go, oh yeah, tick. Like, well, am I taking crazy pills, or does that not actually work? Just because I align to all the CIS tick boxes that are related to HIPAA, does that mean I'm HIPAA compliant? I don't think it does.
Well, yes and no. So here's the deal: is that HIPAA isn't really prescriptive on the technical controls of implementation. So the reason why they do that is you pick a technical benchmark like CIS or like HITRUST, which gives prescriptive controls of what you need to implement, and then you map those back to the kind of controls that are in HIPAA or in SOC 2 or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, Eric. Just there in office hours, I've just posted a link to like a open source secure controls framework just as reference material there. But yeah, what I tend to do is we do something like a baseline against a NIST control. And then because you've got a baseline of a NIST standard, then answering SOC 2, ISO, and HIPAA becomes easier because you've got a good baseline, and then it's basically just differentiating the additional controls for those other variants.
And was your point earlier that you in complying to one, you might violate your kind of compliance requirements for the other one? Or
No, my point was that if you're separating it out into different accounts, each of those accounts would need to be compliant in their own right. So you can't use the fact that you're complying to HIPAA in one account to say, but because I'm complying to HIPAA there, I'm also now assuming that I'm compliant to HIPAA
Oh
here.
yeah, of course, that's true.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And but to but to your point though, yeah, you'll be enabling like if you're using at least the AWS methods with Security Hub, you might be enabling 4 of these conformance packs. You'll have like, 500 different checks going on, and you'll be compliant with some percentage of those until you start remediating those. Yeah. And the other thing to note is you cannot disable regions that are the default regions in AWS, and there's 17 default regions, I believe. Only the new regions they're launching can be disabled. And what that means is, while you can deploy an SCP that prevents resources from being deployed there, you don't really have, unless you're running compliance there, running your checks there, you can't with confidence say that you don't know that nothing bad is happening. So you actually end up having to deploy it to every one of the 17 default regions in every single account.
Yeah, and that's where something like a Wiz or an Orca also comes in, because you could actually see if there are resources created in those regions, and those are rules that you could set up in like your Wiz as well, that would alert you, hey, this account, we're seeing resources in US East 1, and this is an alert that we've enabled, that you've enabled to tell you when US East 1 is being utilized in that specific account, because maybe you don't want stuff there.
All right. So
Can I
let's see.
just riff on this a tiny bit more, Eric? All your modules do bridge crew checks, right? So does that mean you're using Prisma Cloud? And does that mean that how far does that get you along your kind of compliance journey by using Cloud Posse modules that have bridge crew checks going, yes, always fine?
Exactly. Yeah, so exactly. It's a bridge crew checks that we use, and bridge crew just does that as a service for open source, of course. And what we try and do is ensure that our defaults are usually compliant. Now, as we accept pull requests and as we are making changes, we're not always keeping these current and whatnot. But the idea is that we're trying to go for default values in our variables that are secure by default. In other words, is if encryption at rest is an option, we enable that as true. And that gets you a good part of the way. Now, to get compliance, this is where it's how you implement your architectures that will help shape some of that. What we have if you look at Cloud Posse's ecosystem, if you go to Terraform AWS components, these are our root modules that we've implemented of the various systems. And all of these have all the toggles necessary that when configured the right way should reduce the flags raised in Security Hub, so to say. Out of the box, you're probably going to be somewhere around 70% compliant, and then have to do 30% more in terms of remediations and tuning. Depending on
bridge crew tell you if your components are compliant.
Right? Yeah, when I say that, I'm talking about like CIS, which is the most common one enabled. Obviously, if you enable other standards, high trust or ISO 27001, it's going to differ.
And I guess something I was wondering about this is, once you've assembled your modules into components,
Yeah.
And then maybe you've kind of, I guess you've not quite deployed them, but you're as assembled as you're going to get. Do you then get a better view of whether you've used the compliant defaults, or are you kind of on your own there once you've started passing parameters to modules, you're off the grid?
No, so this is where you have different levels of visibility, basically. So there's a movement to shift left, which is great. That's Bridge Crew, TFSec, Sentinel, and so forth. But it's not a substitute for having a monitoring of what's actually deployed in AWS. So that's where Vanta and Wiz.io and other tools like that come up. Security Hub is the one we support for AWS. And so to answer your question, actually, we kind of lay this out here. If you go to Cloud Posse, reference architecture, foundational security and compliance. So what we do is we deploy the full suite of AWS security-oriented products, GuardDuty, Inspector, Macie, KubeBench for Kubernetes, if you're using that, etc. We feed those into Security Hub, and then you know what your posture is. Then you know, based on all the configured checks, how well you're doing in every single account, in every single region. That's your hit list. Now you go through and remediate each one of those until you're in good standing, or disable the ones that are irrelevant. Does that approach to compliance make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And yeah, and that's really helpful. What I was actually asking was, I guess, still from a purely Terraform perspective,
Okay.
but a bigger picture than just the
Okay.
module. So you've assembled your modules into, like, I guess, your infra live repository.
Yes.
And, you've got all your Atmos craziness and all that. Will Bridge Crew still tell you,
oh yeah,
you're all good, you haven't overridden any of Eric's nice clean defaults?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So Bridge Crew will out of the box be able to tell you if your root modules are following good practices, but you would need to, I know with Chekhov, it would be possible, because Chekhov runs after the plan phase, when you have your plan file, and I believe you can validate it then. But with Bridge Crew, if it's just looking at the Terraform code, it's not going to know what the values are. You're going to need to know what the TF variables are. So the Terraform variable files, we have the ability to generate them. Like in our implementations, we don't commit them. If we committed those variable files, and then there should be some way to have Bridge Crew validate that this root module with those variables are compliant or non-compliant, but we have not gone through that exercise.
Gotcha.
Sorry, Eric, have you guys considered using alternative IAC scanners, like an example of SNCC that supports scanning Terraform code bases as well? Yeah, go on. I interjected at the wrong time. No, I think you got the gist at least. Yeah, so SNCC. Yeah, so SNCC is one of the most common static analysis security tools that we see customers deploy. It's not part of our Cloud Posse engagement. It's another commercial offering. I'm mostly interested in tools that work open source, that our customers don't need to have another subscription for. We do make some exceptions for that. Opsgenie, Datadog, Spacelift are three of those. But on the compliance side, we're not getting in the middle of that right now. That's why I was taking notes there when you shared that link, Alan, for the Compliance Forge. That looks interesting. I haven't seen that. I want to take a look at it. I would be more interested in looking at like Chekhov and TFSec and integrating those with GitHub Actions to accomplish something good enough.
No more questions, Your Honor.
All right, Dave. Those were good. Keep checking in here. Let us know how your research is going, and if you have more questions on that.
Yeah, thanks.
Also, what's interesting about Snyk is they have this CLI to test, and their CLI accepts Terraform plan JSON. So you can run an arbitrary complex orchestration around your Terraform, like Atmos, Terraform run, and just in that plan step, just have an extra step to let Snyk scan your plan JSON before you can hit apply. So that would solve all of it.
Yeah. Also, we are working on right now building out all the GitHub action workflows for Atmos, so that those will be open sourced hopefully in the next couple months here. There's a lot of work going into it for a major enterprise customer. All right, we have another few minutes here. Any more questions? On any topic, DevOps related, CICD, release engineering, monitoring, SRE, security. All right, if no questions on that, questions about life?
Yeah, I got a question about life.
Go for it.
So I have a new apartment. Why is my oven installed improperly? That's a joke, but it is. It's
Is it one of these
designed.
things where you can't open the cabinet when the when the oven lid goes down or something?
Similar to that, but more like, why can't I close the bottom drawer? And why is the bottom drawer touching a ungrounded outlet without grommets touching 240 volts? And how did I not shock myself doing that? It's really where I'm at right now.
Well, that I think is best answered by Darwinism, survival of the fittest.
I do have a comment on GKE versus AWS stuff, as I'm realizing. I always found everything in AWS to be very difficult because you have to know so much just to kind of get into it. Everything has to be architected from the ground up. And GKE makes a lot of things easy until you're working with enterprise. And I think I mentioned that last week. So we're really running into a problem where they did not provision me a standard GKE Anthos environment for our application that we're deploying. And in doing so, with only having an app tenant environment, whatever their architecture looks like, we don't have our own VPC. So we're trying to figure out how all the automatically generated subnets are working with GKE. So we're pretty much re-architecting everything from the bottom up, which is, I guess, a good thing for me. So now I'm learning this stuff, but it doesn't get easier. Google is not easy when it's.
That's interesting. I mean, but this is, this is just one of those classic problems where when you add these abstractions in to make things easier, it makes, you get 80% further in 20% of the time, but that last 20%, if you need to change it, you spend 80% more working around it. Yeah. That's interesting. Alan, you work a bunch with GCP as well. I don't know.
No, I'm more an AWS fanatic. I stay away from GCP myself. Not that I don't appreciate it, but I prefer having the fuller control. I think I'm a little bit more old school in that sense, that I prefer seeing and being able to control, this is my VPC, this is the subnet structure or the IP structure that I want, this is the security group, this is the public private subnet that I want, and I want to be able to control that from the ground up. And again, my preference for this is, if you look at something like Azure, where Azure goes and bases everything against a subscription, like my personal feelings is that you just get much further with something like AWS. And if you go off AWS, the closest thing that I found that actually has been working quite nice is OpenStack. And what OpenStack have done is they've also got the support for interpreting CloudFormation templates. So even if you've spent some time in AWS, you can go into OpenStack and basically deploy your CloudFormation templates. And it has a great translation library over there if you ever bought into CloudFormation as the go-to and are stuck on AWS. There are other alternative methods out there. But like you say, they make it so easy to spin stuff up, but like after the fact, if you have to go back, you spend so much time having to go re-engineering like all of the baseline stuff that you accept for granted when you sign on to those platforms, that it almost becomes like well, it would have been easier to just like do a clean slate project at that point.
I'd like to add that our client they actually have their an entire registry of Terraform components. They're analogous to whatever Google's are for their I guess their tenants, right? So it would be cool if I could just use those or see the registry. But when they do screen shares with me, I'm looking at this like collection of stuff that's everything is very straightforward and exactly what I already have, but with their special sauce added on top. So, whatever security accounts need to be created, blah, blah, blah. But because I'm not in the right project space for them, because I'm not an enterprise client, I don't get access to any of those modules. And therefore we have to reverse engineer all of theirs, recreate them manually, like service accounts and whatnot, and get permission to create such service accounts for every step of the way. So it's not like they don't have it. I think it is possible, but I think
saying that is Google or?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So Google Cloud's Terraform modules as the basis.
Oh, interesting. So
Yes.
You're saying if you go to Terraform Google modules, you're saying a lot of these don't work with a standard subscription, like standard.
No, sorry. My client has implemented all of these modules themselves and have their own registry that adds to it.
Okay, gotcha.
So everything is exactly the same, except if I were to, I can't actually use them or see what they're supposed to do. And the people that are on my team within this project this is not their specialty. So it's like, it's there, but it's not.
Okay. I gotcha. Has anyone used a lot of these Google modules? I'm just curious how they, unlike the AWS modules, these are actually managed by the Google organization. I find that interesting. Cool. All right, we are at time for today. I want to be mindful of everyone's calendar. So thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you all next week, same time, same place. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, head over to youtube.com/Cloud Posse and subscribe. It helps us out a great deal. If you want to register for our weekly office hours and get an invitation to your inbox, just go to cloudposse.com/office hours and you'll get that. We also have our quiz here. If you are interested in working with Cloud Posse and getting a taste for what we could help you with, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz to book a session with me directly, and we'll go over your problems. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you later.